Chapter 11, A Surprise for Mrs. Fox. The small fox ran back along the tunnel as fast as he could, carrying the 3 plump hens. He was exploding with joy. Just wait, he kept thinking. Just wait till Mummy sees these. He had a long way to run, but he never stopped once along the way. And he came bursting in upon Mrs. Fox. "Mummy," he cried, out of breath. "Look, Mummy, look. Wake up and see what I've brought you." Mrs. Fox, who was weaker than ever now from lack of food, opened one eye and looked at the hens. "I'm dreaming," she murmured, and closed her eye again. "You're not dreaming, Mummy. They're real chickens. We're saved. We're not going to starve." Mrs. Fox opened both eyes and sat up quickly. "But my dear child," she cried, "where on earth?" "Bogus chicken house number 1, spluttered the small fox. "We tunneled right up under the floor, and you've never seen so many big fat hens in all your life. And Dad said to prepare a feast. They'll be back soon." The sight of food seemed to give new strength to Mrs. Fox. "A feast it shall be," he said, standing up. "Oh, what a fantastic fox your father is. Hurry up, child, and start plucking those chickens." Far away down in the tunnel, the fantastic Mr. Fox was saying, "Now for the next bit, my darlings. This one'll be as easy as pie. All we have to do is dig another tunnel from here to there." "To where, Dad?" "Don't ask so many questions. Start digging." Chapter 12, Badger. Mr. Fox and the three remaining small foxes dug fast and straight. They were all too excited now to feel tired or hungry. They knew they were going to have a whacking great feast before long, and that, in fact, it was none other than Bogey's chickens they were going to eat, made them chortle with laughter every time they thought of it. It was lovely to realize that while the fat farmer was sitting up there on the hill, waiting for them to starve, he was also giving them their dinner without knowing it. "Keep digging," said Mr. Fox. "It's not much farther." All of a sudden, a deep voice above their heads said, "Who goes there?" The foxes jumped. They looked up quickly, and they saw, peeking through a small hole in the roof of a tunnel, a long, black, pointed, furry face. "Badger!" cried Mr. Fox. "Foxy!" cried Badger. "My goodness me! I'm glad I found someone at last. I've been digging around in circles for 3 days and nights, and I haven't the foggiest idea where I am." Badger made the hole in the ceiling bigger and dropped down beside the foxes. A small badger, his son, dropped down after him. "Haven't you heard what's happening up on the hill?" Badger said excitedly. "It's chaos. Half the wood has disappeared, and there are men with guns all over the countryside. None of us can get out, even at night. We're all starving to death." "Who is we?" asked Mr. Fox. "All us diggers. That's me and Mole and Rabbit and all our wives and children. Even Weasel, who can usually sneak out of the tightest spots, is right now hiding down my hole with Mrs. Weasel and 6 kids. What on earth are we going to do, Foxy? I think we're finished." Mr. Fox looked at his 3 children, and he smiled. The children smiled back at him, sharing his secret. "My dear old Badger," he said, "this mess you're in is all my fault." "I know it's your fault," said Badger furiously. "And the farmers are not going to give up till they've got you. Unfortunately, that means us as well. It means everyone on the hill." Badger sat down and put a paw around his small son. "We're done for," he said softly. "My poor wife up there is so weak she can't dig another yard." "Nor can mine," said Mr. Fox, "and yet at this very minute she is preparing for me and my children the most delicious feast of plump, juicy chickens." "Stop!" cried Badger. "Don't tease me. I can't stand it." "It's true," cried small Foxies. "Dad's not teasing. We've got chickens galore. And because everything is entirely my fault," said Mr. Fox, "I invite you to share the feast. I invite everyone to share it. You and Mole and Rabbit and Weasel and all your wives and children. There'll be plenty to go around, I can assure you." "You mean it?" cried Badger. "You really mean it?" Mr. Fox pushed his face close to Badger's and whispered darkly, "Do you know where we've just been?" "Where?" "Right inside Bogey's chicken house number 1. "No." "Yes. But that is nothing to where we are going now. You have come just at the right moment, my dear Badger. You can help us dig, and in the meanwhile, your small son can run back to Mrs. Badger and all the others and spread the good news." Mr. Fox turned to the small badger and said, "Tell them they are invited to a fox's feast. Then bring them all down here and follow this tunnel back until you find my home." "Yes, Mr. Fox," said Small Badger. "Yes, sir. Right away, sir. Oh, thank you, sir." And he scrambled quickly back through the hole in the roof of the tunnel and disappeared. Chapter 13. Bunce's Giant Storehouse. "My dear Foxy," cried Badger, "what in the world has happened to your tail?" "Don't talk about it, please," said Mr. Fox. "It's a painful subject." They were digging the new tunnel. They dug on in silence. Badger was a terrific digger, and the tunnel went forward at a terrific pace now that he was lending a paw. Soon they were crouching underneath yet another wooden floor. Mr. Fox grinned slyly, showing sharp white teeth. "If I am not mistaken, my dear Badger," he said, "we are now underneath the farm which belongs to that nasty little pot-bellied dwarf Bunce. We are, in fact, directly underneath the most interesting part of that farm." "Ducks and geese!" cried Small Foxes, licking his lips. "Juicy, tender ducks and big, fat geese." "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "But how in the world can you know where we are?" asked Badger. Mr. Fox grinned again, showing even more white teeth. "Look," he said, "I know my way around these farms blindfolded. For me, it's just as easy below ground as it is above it." He reached high and pushed up one wooden floorboard, then another. He poked his head through the gap. "Yes," he shouted, jumping up into the room above. "I've done it again. I've hit it smack on the nose, right in the bullseye. Come and look." Quickly, Badger and the three small foxes scrambled up after him. They stopped and stared. They stood and gaped. They were so overwhelmed they couldn't speak, for what they saw now was a kind of fox's dream, a badger's dream, a paradise for hungry animals. "This, my dear old Badger," proclaimed Mr. Fox, "is Bunce's mighty storehouse. All his finest stuff is stored in here before he sends it off to market. Against all the four walls of the great room, stacked in cupboards and piled upon shelves reaching floor to ceiling, were thousands and thousands of the finest and fattest ducks and geese, plucked and ready for roasting. And up above, dangling from the rafters, there must have been at least 100 smoked hams and 50 sides of bacon." "Just feast your eyes on that," cried Mr. Fox, dancing up and down. "What do you think of it, eh? Pretty good grub." Suddenly, as though springs had been released in their legs, the three hungry small foxes and the ravenously hungry Badger sprang forward to grab the luscious food. "Stop," ordered Mr. Fox. "This is my party, so I shall do the choosing." The others fell back, licking their chops. Mr. Fox began prowling around the storehouse, examining the glorious display with an expert eye. A thread of saliva slid down one side of his jaw and hung suspended in mid-air, then snapped. "We mustn't overdo it," he said. "Mustn't give the game away. Mustn't let them know that what we've been up to. We must be neat and tidy and take just a few of the choicest morsels. So, to start with, we shall have 4 plump young ducks." He took them from the shelf. "Oh, how lovely and fat they are. No wonder Bunce gets a special price for them in the market." "All right, Badger. Lend me a hand to get them down. You children can help as well. There we go. Goodness me, look how your mouths are watering. And now, I think we had better have a few geese. 3 will be quite enough. We'll take the biggest. Oh my, you'll never see finer geese than these in a king's kitchen. Gently does it. That's the way. And what about a couple of nice smoked hams? I adore smoked hams, don't you, Badger? Fetch me the step ladder, will you please?" Mr. Fox climbed up the ladder and handed down 3 magnificent hams. "And do you like bacon, Badger?" "I'm mad about bacon," cried Badger, dancing with excitement. "Let's have a side of bacon. That big one up there." "And carrots, Dad," said the smallest of 3 small foxes. "We must take some of those carrots." "Don't be a twerp," said Mr. Fox. "You know we never eat things like that." "It's not for us, Dad. It's for the rabbits. They only eat vegetables." "My goodness me, you're right," cried Mr. Fox. "What thoughtful little fellow you are. Take 10 bunches of carrots." Soon all this lovely loot was lying in a neat heap upon the floor. The small foxes crouched close, their noses twitching, their eyes shining like stars. "And now," said Mr. Fox, "we shall have to borrow from our friend Bunce 2 of those useful push carts over in the corner." He and Badger fetched the push carts, and the ducks and the geese and the hams and the bacons were loaded up upon them. Quickly the push carts were lowered through the hole in the floor. The animals slid down after them. Back in the tunnel, Mr. Fox again pulled the floorboards very carefully into place so that no one could see that they had moved. "My darlings," he said, pointing to the 2 of the 3 small foxes, "take a cart each and run back as fast as you can to your mother. Give her my love and tell her we are having guests for dinner, the badgers, the moles, the rabbits, and the weasels. Tell her it must be a truly great feast, and tell her the rest of us will be home as soon as we've done one more little job." "Yes, Dad, right away, Dad," they cried, and they grabbed a trolley each and went rushing off down the tunnel. Chapter 14. Badger Has Doubts. "Just one more visit," cried Mr. Fox, "and I'll bet I know where that'll be." The only small fox now left. He was the smallest fox of them all. "Where?" asked Badger. "Well," said the smallest fox, "we've been to Bogey's and we've been to Bunce, but we haven't been to Bean. It must be Bean." "You're right," said Mr. Fox, "but what you don't know is which part of Bean's place we are about to visit." "Which?" they both said together. "Aha," said Mr. Fox, "just wait and see." They were digging as they talked. The tunnel was going forward fast. Suddenly, Badger said, "Doesn't this worry you just a tiny bit, Foxy?" "Worry me?" said Mr. Fox. "What?" "All this stealing." Mr. Fox stopped digging and stared at Badger as though he had gone completely dotty. "My dear old furry frump," he said, "do you know anyone in the whole world who wouldn't swipe a few chickens if his children were starving to death?" There was a short silence while Badger thought deeply about this. "You are too respectable," said Mr. Fox. "There's nothing wrong with being respectable," Badger said. "Look," said Mr. Fox, "Bogus and Bunce and Bean are out to kill us. You realize that, I hope." "I do, Foxy, I do indeed," said the gentle Badger. "But we're not going to stoop to their level. We don't want to kill them." "I should hope not, indeed," said Badger. "We wouldn't dream of it," said Mr. Fox. "We shall simply take a little food here and there to keep us and our families alive. Right?" "I suppose we'll have to," said Badger. "If they want to be horrible, let them," said Mr. Fox. "We down here are decent, peace-loving people." Badger laid his head down on one side and smiled at Mr. Fox. "Foxy," he said, "I love you." "Thank you," said Mr. Fox. "And now let's get on with the digging." 5 minutes later, Badger's front paws hit against something flat and hard. "What on earth is this?" he said. "It looks like a solid stone wall." He and Mr. Fox scraped away the soil. It was a wall, but it was built of bricks and not stones. The wall was right in front of them, blocking their way. "Now who in the world would build a wall under the ground?" asked Badger. "Very simple," said Mr. Fox. "It's the wall of an underground room, and if I am not mistaken, it is exactly what I am looking for." Chapter 15. Bean's Secret Cider Cellar. Mr. Fox examined the wall carefully. He saw that the cement between the bricks was old and crumbly, so he loosened a brick without much trouble and pulled it away. Suddenly, out from the hole where the brick had been, there popped a small, sharp face with whiskers. "Go away," it snapped. "You can't come in here. It's private." "Good Lord," said Badger. "It's Rat." "You saucy beast," said Mr. Fox. "I should have guessed we'd find you down here somewhere." "Go away," shrieked Rat. "Go on. Beat it. This is my private pitch." "Shut up," said Mr. Fox. "I will not shut up," shrieked Rat. "This is my place. I got here first." Mr. Fox gave a brilliant smile, flashing his white teeth. "My dear Rat," he said softly, "I am a hungry fellow, and if you don't hop it quickly, I shall eat you up in one gulp." That did it. Rat popped back fast out of sight. Mr. Fox laughed and began pulling more bricks out of the wall. When he had made a biggish hole, he crept through it. Badger and the smallest fox followed him in. They found themselves in a vast, damp, gloomy cellar. "This is it," cried Mr. Fox. "This is what?" said Badger. "The place is empty." "Where are the turkeys?" asked the smallest fox, staring into the gloom. "I thought Bean was a turkey man." "He is a turkey man," said Mr. Fox, "but we're not here for turkeys now. We've got plenty of food." "Then what do we need, Dad?" "Take a good look around," said Mr. Fox. "Don't you see anything that interests you?" Badger and the smallest fox peered into the half-darkness. As their eyes became accustomed to the gloom, they began to see what looked like a whole lot of big glass jars standing upon shelves around the walls. They went closer. They were jars. There were hundreds of them, and upon each one was written the word cider. The smallest fox leaped high in the air. "Oh, Dad," he cried out, "look what we found. It's cider." "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "Tremendous," shouted Badger. "Bean's secret cider cellar," said Mr. Fox. "But go carefully, my dears. Don't make a noise. This cellar is right underneath the farmhouse itself." "Cider," said Badger, "is especially good for badgers. We take it as medicine. One large glass 3 times a day with meals and another at bedtime. It will make the feast into a banquet," said Mr. Fox. While they were talking, the smallest fox had sneaked a jar off the shelf and had taken a gulp. "Wow!" he gasped. "Wowee!" You must have understood that this was not the ordinary, weak, fizzy cider one buys in a store. It was the real stuff, a home-brewed, fiery liquor that burned in your throat and boiled in your stomach. "Ah!" gasped the smallest fox. "This is some cider." "That's quite enough of that," said Mr. Fox, grabbing the jar and putting it into his own lips. He took a tremendous gulp. "It's miraculous," he whispered, fighting for breath. "It's fabulous. It's beautiful." "It's my turn," said Badger, taking the jar and tilting his head well back. The cider gurgled and bubbled down his throat. It's like melted gold," he gasped. "Oh, Foxy, it's like drinking sunbeams and rainbows." "You're poaching," shrieked Rat. "Put that down at once. There'll be none of that left for me." Rat was perched upon the highest shelf in the cellar, peering out from behind a huge jar. There was a small rubber tube inserted in the neck of the jar, and Rat was using this tube to suck out the cider. "You're drunk," said Mr. Fox. "Mind your own business," shrieked Rat. "And if you great clumsy brutes come messing around in here, we'll all get caught. Get out and leave me to sip my cider in peace." At that moment, they heard a woman's voice calling out in the house above them. "Hurry up and get that cider, Mabel," the voice called. "You know Mr. Bean doesn't like to be kept waiting, especially when he's been out all night in a tent." The animals froze. They stayed absolutely still. Their ears prickled, their bodies tense. Then they heard the sound of the door being opened. The door was at the top of the flight of stone steps leading down the house to the cellar, and now someone was starting to come down those steps. Chapter 16. The Woman. "Quick," said Mr. Fox. "Hide!" He and Badger and the smallest fox jumped up on the shelf and crouched behind a row of big cider jars. Peering around the jars, they saw a huge woman coming down into the cellar. At the foot of the steps, the woman paused, looking to the right and left. Then she turned and headed straight for the place where Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox were hiding. She stopped right in front of them. The only thing between her and them was a row of cider jars. She was so close, Mr. Fox could hear the sound of her breathing. Peeping through the cracks between the 2 bottles, he noticed that she carried a big rolling pin in one hand. "How many will she want this time, Mrs. Bean?" the woman shouted. And from the top of the steps, the other woman called back, "Bring up 2 or 3 jars." "He drank 4 yesterday, Mrs. Bean." "Yes, but he won't want that many today because he's not going to be up there more than a few hours longer. He says the fox is bound to make a run for it this morning. It can't possibly stay down that hole another day without food." The woman in the cellar reached out and lifted a jar of cider from the shelf. The jar she took was the one next to the jar behind which Mr. Fox was crouching. "I'll be glad when that rotten brute is killed and strung up on the front porch," she called out. "And by the way, Mrs. Bean, your husband promised I could have the tail as a souvenir." "The tail's been all shot to pieces," said the voice from upstairs. "Didn't you know that?" "You mean it's ruined?" "Of course it's ruined. They shot the tail but missed the fox." "Oh, heck," said the big woman. "I did so want that tail." "You can have the head instead, Mabel. You can get it stuffed and hang it on your bedroom wall. Hurry up now, with that cider." "Yes, ma'am. I'm coming," said the big woman. And she took a second jar from the shelf. "If she takes one more, she'll see us," thought Mr. Fox. He could feel the smallest fox's body pressed tightly against his own, quivering with excitement. "Will 2 be enough, Mrs. Bean, or shall I take 3? "My goodness, Mabel, I don't care as long as you get a move on." "Then 2 it is," said the huge woman, speaking to herself now. "He drinks too much anyway." Carrying a jar in each hand and with the rolling pin tucked under one arm, she walked away across the cellar. At the foot of the steps she paused and looked around, sniffing the air. "There's rats down here again, Mrs. Bean. I can smell 'em." "Then poison 'em, then." "Woman, poison them. You know where the poison's kept." "Yes, ma'am," Mabel said. She climbed slowly out of sight up the steps. The door slammed. "Quick," said Mr. Fox. "Grab a jar each and run for it." Rat stood on his high shelf and shrieked. "What did I tell you? You nearly got nabbed, didn't you? You nearly gave the game away. You keep out of here from now on. I don't want you around. This is my place." "You," said Mr. Fox, "are going to be poisoned." "Poppycock," said Rat. "I sit up here and watch her putting the stuff down. She'll never get me." Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox ran across the cellar, clutching a gallon jar each. "Bye, Rat," they called out as they disappeared through the hole in the wall. "Thanks for the lovely cider." "Thieves!" shrieked Rat. "Robbers, bandits, and burglars." Chapter 17, The Great Feast. Back in the tunnel they paused so that Mr. Fox could brick up the hole in the wall. He was humming to himself as he put the bricks back in place. "I can still taste the glorious cider," he said. "What an impudent fellow Rat is." "He has bad manners," Badger said. "All rats have bad manners. I've never met a polite rat yet." "And he drinks too much," said Mr. Fox, putting the last brick in place. "There we are now. Now, home to the feast." They grabbed their jars of cider and off they went. Mr. Fox was in front, the smallest fox came next, and Badger last. Along the tunnel they flew, past the turning that led to Bunce's mighty storehouse, past Bogus's chicken house, number 1, and then up the long home stretched toward the place where they knew Mr. Fox would be waiting. "Keep it up, my darling," shouted Mr. Fox. "We'll be here soon. We'll soon be there. Think what's waiting for us at the other end. And just think what we're bringing home with us in these jars. That ought to cheer up poor Mrs. Fox." Mr. Fox sang a little song as he ran. "Home again swiftly I glide, back to my beautiful bride. She'll not feel so rotten as soon as she's gotten some cider inside her inside." Then Badger joined in. "Oh, poor Mrs. Badger," he cried, "so hungry she very nearly died. But she'll not feel so hollow if only she'll swallow some cider inside her inside." They were all still singing as they rounded the final corner and burst in upon the most wonderful and amazing sight any of them had ever seen. The feast was just beginning. A large dining room had been hollowed out of the earth, and in the middle of it, seated around a huge table, were no less than 29 animals. They were Mrs. Fox and 3 small foxes, Mrs. Badger and 3 small badgers, Mole and Mrs. Mole and 4 small moles, Rabbit and Mrs. Rabbit and 5 small rabbits, Weasel and Mr. Weasel, Weasel and Mrs. Weasel, and 6 small weasels. The table was covered with chickens and ducks and geese and hams and bacon, and everyone was tucking into the lovely food. "My darling," cried Mrs. Fox, jumping up and hugging Mr. Fox. "We couldn't wait. Please forgive us." Then she hugged the smallest fox of all, and Mrs. Badger hugged Badger, and everyone hugged everyone else. Amid shouts of joy, the great jars of cider were placed upon the table, and Mr. Fox and Badger and the smallest fox sat down with the others. You must remember, no one had eaten a thing for several days. They were ravenous, so for a while there was no conversation at all. There was only the sound of crunching and chewing as the animals attacked the succulent food. At last Badger stood up. He raised his glass of cider and called out, "A toast! I want you all to stand and drink a toast to our dear friend who has saved our lives this day, Mr. Fox." "To Mr. Fox," they all shouted, standing up and raising their glasses. "To Mr. Fox, long may he live." Then Mrs. Fox got shyly to her feet and said, "I don't want to make a speech. I just want to say one thing, and it is this. My husband is a fantastic fox." Everyone clapped and cheered. Then Mr. Fox himself stood up. "This delicious meal," he began. Then he stopped. In the silence that followed, he let fly a tremendous belch. There was laughter and more clapping. "This delicious meal, my friends," he went on, "is by courtesy of Messrs. Bogus, Bunce, and Bean." More cheering and laughter. "And I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have." He let fly another colossal belch. "Better out than in," said Badger. "Thank you," said Mr. Fox, grinning hugely. "But now, my friends, let us be serious. Let us drink of tomorrow and the next day and the days after that. If we go out, we will be killed, right?" "Right," they shouted. "We'll be shot before we've gone a yard," said Badger. "Exactly," said Mr. Fox. "But who wants to go out, anyway? Let me ask you that. We are all diggers, every one of us. We hate the outside. The outside is full of enemies. We only go out because we have to get food for our families. But now, my friends, we have an entirely new setup. We have a safe tunnel leading to 3 of the finest stores in the world." "We do indeed," said Badger. "I've seen 'em all." "And you know what that means," said Mr. Fox. "It means that none of us need to ever go out into the open again." There was a buzz of excitement around the table. I therefore invite you all," Mr. Fox went on, "to stay here with me forever." "Forever!" they cried. "My goodness, how marvelous!" And Rabbit said to Mrs. Rabbit, "My dear, just think, we're never going to be shot again in our lives." "We will make," said Mr. Fox, "a little underground village with streets and houses on each side, separate houses for Badger and Moles and Rabbits and Weasels and Foxes. And every day I will go shopping for you all, and every day we will eat like kings." The cheering that followed this speech went on for many minutes. Chapter 18, Still Waiting. Outside the Fox's hole, Bogus and Bunce and Bean sat there beside their tents with their guns on their laps. It was beginning to rain. Water was trickling down the necks of the 3 men and into their shoes. "He won't stay down here much longer now," Bogus said. "The brute must be famished," Bunce said. "That's right," Bean said. "He'll be making a dash for it any moment." "Keep your guns handy." They sat there by the hole waiting for the fox to come out. And so far as I know, they are still waiting. The end. I hope you enjoyed this book. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up.